I'm Ron Connolly. I'm a doctor of education with the emphasis of leadership for the advancement of learning and service. And I'm here with you today to talk about shoot 'em or feed 'em, identifying the mindful choices in our relationships. Here's a little secret that I'd like to share with you. I hate having my picture taken. Now, that may be kind of surprising to you considering I've taken a lot of selfies. I hadn't even realized I'd taken so many selfies, and I was going through some of my files and I thought, wow, I have a whole bunch of selfies and I don't know how I accumulated so many, but I've got quite a few of them. And I just thought to myself, for a guy who hates having his picture taken, how come I've got so many pictures of me? Well, the more I thought about it, the more it comes down to this. I think it's part of our culture. You see, we live in arguably the most narcissistic time ever in human history. If you think about it, you can take out your cell phone now, and in a twitch of a finger, you could have dozens of pictures, not only of yourself, but anybody else you wanted to capture. It's made it easier for us to focus on ourselves. That's also been perpetuated by social media. If you go back to MySpace and now Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat, there's all kinds of opportunities to use that technology in a way to focus a lot of the time on ourselves. It's so much a part of our culture these days that the founders of the English language itself have turned selfie into a word. That's right. In 2013, Oxford University decided to include in the Oxford University Dictionary a brand new word, and it was their word of the year, and that word was selfie. I guess they have that license. After all, they are the founders of the English language. And now it's even progressed to the point where we have selfie sticks. Technology is great. It can do a lot of things, but it can't make our arms any longer than they already are. And so now we have a selfie stick. It kind of makes me wonder, though, what happens when there are groups together that are taking selfies? We call it a groupie stick then? I don't know. Food for thought, I guess. But where is this leading to? Well, the point in me bringing this up is that narcissism is not self-actualizing. And I know that sounds kind of heady. And so really, in simple terms, we can't become our best selves if we predominantly focus on ourselves. And really, in the end, on our last day on earth, I doubt very seriously if anybody is going to wish that they'd ever taken one more selfie. Ultimately, it's the lives of others that make our own so very rich. Without our interaction with other people in meaningful ways, really, our life would have a lot less meaning of its own. Profound things happen when we're mindful of other people. Friendships are born. Relationships are formed. Memories are made. Life is enriched. Well, you may be listening to this and thinking to yourself, well, that's great, Ron, but how do we do that? I mean, if we're not in mindful relationships right now, it's not like we can just flip a switch and make it happen. So how can we really focus on generating more mindful, quality relationships? And so what I want to do is introduce you to some tools that may help in building mindful relationships. But in order to introduce some of those tools, I'm going to talk about two different scenarios with you. The first scenario is a historical scenario placed in the Civil War, Battle of Gettysburg. The second scenario is based on a personal experience that I encountered while I was at a conference, an educational conference a number of years ago. So back to the first scenario. The Battle of Gettysburg occurred right in the middle of the Civil War. And so to put this into perspective, the South had been victorious in beating the Union Army all throughout the southern states. And it was the opinion of General Robert E. Lee that if he could take his troops north and engage the Union in their own backyard and defeat them there, he could crush their will to fight, thereby winning the war. And so that's what he did. He amassed a large amount of troops and he marched up the East Coast until he arrived in Pennsylvania. Now, they weren't intent on ending up in Gettysburg, but as fate had it, that's exactly where they wound up. And once there, the weight of the battle was such that the entire Civil War, the outcome of the entire Civil War, was destined to be determined initially by the outcome of that particular battle. So there was a lot of significance to the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, at that particular time, there was a lieutenant colonel named Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, previously a professor at Bowdoin University in Maine, and he was the commanding officer of the 20th Maine Infantry Regiment. Suddenly, he was delegated with the responsibility of taking charge of 120 mutineers from the 2nd Maine Infantry Regiment. Now, mutineers may be an unfamiliar term to most, so I'll kind of explain that. In this particular context, what is meant by that word is these were a number of soldiers that were part of the 2nd Maine Infantry Regiment. Now, something interesting happened in the 2nd Maine Infantry Regiment. Most of the soldiers of that regiment had signed up for a 2-year term of enlistment, while 120 of the men of that regiment had signed up for a 3-year term of enlistment. Well, when the 2 years was up, with only 120 men, that particular infantry regiment couldn't stand on its own anymore. And so the regiment was disbanded, and the people with 2-year terms of enlistment went home. Meanwhile, the 120 that had 3-year terms of enlistment watched everybody that they were serving with go away, and they simply refused to fight. And when that happened, they were labeled as mutineers. They were treated as prisoners, not necessarily deserters, but clearly they weren't interested in engaging in the fight anymore. And so they were taken captive themselves by their own army. Now, back to Chamberlain. Hours, maybe even minutes before the fight was about to begin, he is delegated to take responsibility for 120 mutineers. When the soldiers of the 2nd Maine were turned over to Chamberlain, he was instructed that, if necessary, he was authorized to shoot them. The first thing Joshua Chamberlain decided to do was approach the men and ask them when the last time was that they had anything to eat. And after being informed that it had been quite a while, even though they were preparing to enter battle, he instructed his sergeant to hastily prepare something for these men to eat because they hadn't eaten in a while. Now, at that particular point, Joshua Chamberlain was faced with a dilemma. He literally could either shoot these soldiers or he could feed them. And at that particular moment in time, he chose to feed them. Not only did he choose to feed them, but with an empathetic ear, he listened as they explained some of the treatment, the maltreatment that they'd experienced since their unit was disbanded. A short time later, Joshua Chamberlain approached the group of men as they sat on a hillside, and again, just minutes before they were supposed to enter the battle, he delivered a speech to them explaining the gravity of the situation and their role in it. I'd like you to just take a moment and view that speech as Jeff Daniels portrayed Joshua Chamberlain in the epic movie Gettysburg.
Men, gather round. I've been talking with Private Buckland. He's told me about your problem. There's nothing I can do today. We're moving out in a few minutes. We'll be moving all day. I've been ordered to take you men with me. I'm told that, that if you don't come, I can shoot you. Well, you know I won't do that. Maybe somebody else will, but I won't. So, that's that. Here's the situation. The whole Reb Army is up that road a ways waiting for us, so this is no time for an argument like this. I tell you, we could surely use you fellas. We're now well below half strength. Whether you fight or not, that's up to you. Whether you come along is well, you're coming. You know who we are, what we're doing here, but if you're going to fight alongside us, there's a few things I want you to know. This regiment was formed last summer in Maine. There were 1,000 of us then. There are less than 300 of us now. All of us volunteered to fight for the Union, just as you did. Some came mainly because we were bored at home. Thought this looked like it might be fun. Some came because we were ashamed not to. Many of us came because it was the right thing to do. And all of us have seen men die. This is a different kind of army. If you look back through history, you will see men fighting for pay, for women, for some other kind of loot. They fight for land, power. Because a king leads them, or just because they like killing. But we are here for something new. This has not happened much in the history of the world. We are an army out to set other men free. America should be free ground. All of it. Not divided by a line between slave state and free. All the way. From here to the Pacific Ocean. No man has to bow. No man born to royalty. Here we judge you by what you do, not by who your father was. Here you can be something. Here is the place to build a home. But it's not the land. There's always more land. It's the idea that we all have value. You and me. What we're fighting for, in the end, we're fighting for each other. Sorry, I didn't mean to preach. You go ahead. You talk for a while. If you choose to join us, you want your muskets back, you can have them. Nothing more will be said by anybody anywhere. If you choose not to join us, well, you can come along under guard, and when this is all over, I will do what I can to see you get a fair treatment, but for now, we're moving out. Gentlemen, I think if we lose this fight, we lose the war. So if you choose to join us, I'll be personally very grateful.
So what was the outcome of all of this interaction between Chamberlain and those 120 soldiers? Well, this is an overlay of the battlefield at Little Round Top at Gettysburg, and I just want to show you exactly what was happening at that particular time. So if you take a look at this overview of the battlefield, you can see on the right flank, in the lower part of the screen, the 20th Maine situated there. Just below them are their adversaries, the 15th Alabama. Now, up on the left flank, you can see the 16th Michigan, and their adversary is the 4th Texas. And what Lee wanted to accomplish was, if the 15th Alabama could come around and overcome the 20th Maine, at the same time that the 4th Texas could overcome the 16th Michigan, they could collapse the Union line and win the battle. And so, the 15th Alabama continuously tried to wrap around the 20th Maine. And as they did that, soldiers of the 20th Maine would flex backward. And they would flex backward and to the side. And the 15th Alabama kept pushing, and the 20th Maine kept flexing, to the point where near the end of that particular battle, the 20th Maine was surrounded on 3 sides by the 15th Alabama, and they were fighting nearly back to back with each other to fend off the enemy. At the beginning of the battle, all but a handful of the soldiers of the former 2nd Maine joined Chamberlain and the 20th Maine in the fight against the 15th Alabama. By the end of the battle, all but one of those soldiers had engaged the enemy. And they fought until they ran out of ammunition. With the fully armed 15th Alabama advancing up the hill toward them, Chamberlain had yet another dilemma. At this point, they were out of ammunition. The 15th Alabama was still pressuring them. And so their choice was this. They could either surrender at that point in time, or Chamberlain could have them fix bayonets and charge. And that's precisely what he did. Have you ever heard the term, never bring a knife to a gunfight? Well, that's exactly what Joshua Chamberlain did. And so, equipped with nothing more than glorified spears, his soldiers, to include 119 of those so-called mutineers, charged screaming down the hill at the 15th Alabama. And at the sight of the approach of the 20th Maine, they surrendered their weapons and surrendered their troops. The 20th Maine won the Battle of Little Round Top that day. And the Battle of Gettysburg was won by the Union Army. Had it not, it's conceivable that we as a nation could be completely separate from another nation flying under the Confederate flag. Now, how was Chamberlain able to accomplish a task where soldiers who were labeled mutineers, who refused to fight, were suddenly in a situation where not only were they fighting, but they were fighting nearly to the death with nothing more than knives against firearms? How was he able to inspire those soldiers to do such a thing? Well, to answer that question, we really need to jump forward about 130 years. In 1993, Dr. George Thompson wrote a book entitled Verbal Judo. And in that book, he outlined what he called the 5 universal truths. Now, Dr. Thompson didn't invent the 5 universal truths, but what he did was he identified some tools for creating mindful relationships with others. And he entitled them the 5 universal truths. And in those truths, the first one, he said, was that all people feel the need to be respected. Think about that. All people feel the need to be respected. Have you ever encountered anyone that's ever said, well, I wish someone would just respect me a little less? I've never heard those words before in my life, not coming from somebody else. Everybody wishes to be more respected, or at least respected, period. Okay? The second thing he said is, people would rather be asked than told. I believe that to be true. People don't generally like being told to do things. They're not receptive to that. You know, I recall when I was 3 years old, my mother came to me and she said, Ronnie, would you like to clean your room? And I looked back at her and I said, no, I would not like to clean my room. And she said, okay, well, I'm going to explain to you how this works. My mother was a kind person. But she said, I'm going to explain to you how this works. When I ask you if you'd like to clean your room, I'm not really asking you. I'm saying, sweetie, it's time to clean your room. And so the next time when I ask you if you'd like to clean your room, you should really say, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And from that point forward, I understood. And she said the reason that we ask instead of telling people is because people like it better when we ask them instead of just tell them. And even at 3 years old, I could understand that. So people would rather be asked than told. The third universal truth that Dr. Thompson pointed out was that we all have a desire to know the reason why. Why is that? People have the desire to know why simply because it gives them a sense of purpose. If we're trying to do something and nobody's told us the reason why, we don't feel that we're doing anything productive, anything meaningful. Whereas if you take the time to explain why to someone, now they have a sense of purpose. Now they have a drive to what they're doing. The fourth universal truth that Dr. Thompson pointed out was that people prefer to have options over threats. And think about that. Who enjoys being threatened? I certainly don't. But we do like options, because when you have options, you have choices. And when you have choices, you have power. You have power and control over your own destiny. You have power and control over which path you're going to take. You have power and control over your own relationships. And the final universal truth that Dr. Thompson talked about is the desire for all people to have a second chance. I have never met a person who in their life doesn't wish that they could have done at least one thing better than they did it before. We'd all like the opportunity to have a second chance. And so if we apply those 5 universal truths to what we just saw with Chamberlain, think about this. The first thing that happens with Chamberlain is he's given 120 troops who are considered to be mutineers. They're mishandled, they're mistreated, and he has a choice. He approaches them and finds out that they haven't eaten, but he also knows that he's authorized to shoot them if he feels the need to do so. And so herein lies his dilemma. He can either shoot them or feed them. First, they felt the need to be respected, and he offered them that respect. The first thing he did was fed them. He explained to them he was told he could shoot them, but there was no way he was going to do that. And he listened with an empathetic ear to their situation. He respected them. Second thing he did was he asked them. He asked them to join him. At the end of that speech, you hear him say, "Gentlemen, I believe if we lose this battle, we lose the war. So if you choose to join us, I would personally be very grateful." Now, that wasn't stated in the form of a question, but if you read between the lines, that's exactly what he was doing. He was asking them. He was asking them to join him because the fate of a nation relied on it. The fate of people who had value relied on it. And so he asked them. The next thing Chamberlain did was he explained. He said, you know, if you're going to fight along with us, you need to know our history. You need to know why we're here. And so he goes to great effort to explain to them, this is why we're here. This is what our purpose is. This is the gravity of the situation. The next thing he does is he gives them options. He gives the soldiers of the 2nd Maine options. You can pick up your weapons and join us, and nothing further will be said about any of this. Or, if you choose not to join us, you'll have to come with us, and when this is all over, I'll ensure you receive a fair treatment, but in the meantime, you're going to have to come with us. And so he gives them choices. And so at that point in time, these soldiers, these 120 soldiers who were previously powerless, suddenly have choices. They suddenly have the power to influence their destiny. And they took those. They made good use of that power. And if you wrap all this up together, what it meant for those 120 soldiers is they were afforded a second chance. And isn't that something we'd all like to have now and then? The second scenario that I wanted to introduce you to is based on an encounter that I had while I was at a conference, an education conference, a number of years ago. I went to this conference and I was at the general session, and as soon as it ended, I went to where the breakout session was going to be, and I was early. And so what I decided to do was have an iced coffee and do a crossword puzzle. And so I sat in the room as the facilitator, who was an Ivy League professor, was getting his presentation set up. We'll call the facilitator, he was an Ivy League professor, we'll call him Dr. Carlton. It's not his real name, but that's okay, it'll help convey the message. And he was talking about his son, Kevin, which is also not his son's real name, but that's okay. So Dr. Carlton is talking to his administrative assistant about Kevin, and he said he was really kind of beside himself and sad because he'd lost the closeness to his son that he had previously had. He wasn't connecting with his son, and it was really kind of tearing him apart. And she said, well, what happened to make this suddenly occur? And he said, well, there was an incident about a week ago where Kevin decided he wanted to go to the mall with his friends. And so he called into the school and he said, hello, this is Dr. Carlton. I'm just calling to let you know that my son Kevin won't be in school this afternoon because he's got a doctor's appointment. So the school said, all right, we'll see him tomorrow. And so Kevin left the school and went to the mall. What Kevin wasn't anticipating was, once he got to the mall with his buddies, there was an administrative assistant from the high school that was showing up to pick up some office supplies. And when she arrived at the mall, there was Kevin with his buddies, and she was shocked to see him there because only an hour earlier, she had taken a call from Dr. Carlton saying Kevin was going to be at the doctor. And so that one thing leads to another, and she goes back to the high school, and Dr. Carlton gets called about the situation. And so later that evening, Kevin approaches his dad and says, "Hey, Dad, I'm going out on a date tonight. I'd really like to use the car." And he says, "Well, Kevin, you know, after what happened today, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to use the car. Not only can't you use the car tonight, but I'm going to have to take it away from you for about the next month, Kevin. Sorry about that." And so he was grounded from the use of the car for a month. Now, as Dr. Carlton is telling this to his administrative assistant, he said, "And since that time, I haven't had more than 2 words with my son at any given time." And so as I listened to this story, it wasn't my place to come up with a solution, and I really hadn't given it a second thought. But as time went on, apparently it must have registered in the back of my mind. Because the more I began talking and having conversations about mindful relationships, the more this image kept resurfacing in my mind. The idea that Dr. Carlton was so devastated by this lack of communication, by this breach in communication that he'd had with his son. And so I started thinking about it. Well, we know that the fifth universal truth is that everybody would like to have a second chance. So I started wondering, you know, what would happen if Dr. Carlton had an opportunity at a second chance at this, or at least the opportunity to repair his relationship with Kevin? What would that look like? And so I'm going to kind of play out for you one possibility of what repairing that relationship would look like. Now, I'm going to play both parts, Dr. Carlton and Kevin. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to recognize the difference between the two. So suppose Dr. Carlton came home that day and said, "Kevin, you know, things have been really strained with us over the last week, and I think I understand why, but I'd really just like to have a conversation with you just for a short time. Even if you're upset, I'm hoping that you'll just talk to me for a couple minutes. And so if you wouldn't mind, please just sit down. Okay, and I want you to know I love you and I care about you, and it's really affecting me very deeply that we can't talk. And so can you just tell me what's been bothering you so much?" "Well, yeah, Dad, I can tell you exactly what's been bothering me. You took the car away for a month, Dad. And I was supposed to go on a date that night. The reason I asked you for the car is because I wanted to go out on a date that night." "Well, how did your girlfriend react to that?" "Well, how do you think she reacted, Dad? She was upset, right? She was upset. We were supposed to go out, and now all of a sudden I couldn't have the car." "Why am I so upset?" "Because you took the car away for 30 days, Dad. I was supposed to go on a date that night. I told you I wanted the car to go on a date, and you said I couldn't have it for a month?" "Really? I mean, I was pretty upset by that. And you know what? My girlfriend was upset too, because I had to call her and tell her that we weren't going to be able to go out on a date that night." "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Kevin. Is anybody else upset over your loss of the use of the car?" "Yeah. On Friday, a bunch of us were supposed to go bowling. I was supposed to drive, and when I told my buddies that I couldn't drive, all they did was gave me a hard time. One kid says, 'Well, maybe you could take a tricycle to school then, huh? Maybe your dad can let you use that.' That's humiliating, Dad. I was really embarrassed by that, okay? All right, son. So what I'm hearing here is you were affected by this. Your girlfriend was affected by this. Your buddies were affected by this. There's something else I want to tell you, Kevin. When I went to your school to get this straightened out, I talked to that administrative assistant that saw you at the mall, and she said, "I just want to let you know, Dr. Carlton, that we're starting a new policy at the high school. Parents aren't going to be able to call in anymore and let us know that their kids are going to be sick from school. From now on, we've developed a form, and you're going to have to sign the form, and you're going to have to deliver it to us at school." So in addition to those people that have been affected that you're aware of, well, now the school's been affected, Kevin. And really, parents have been affected. And honestly, when you talk about the school's trust of students, well, that's been affected too. You know, here's the thing, Kevin. I didn't want to have to take the car away from you, and I would really like you to have your car privileges back. I really want you to be able to go out on a date. If you wanted to go out on a date tonight, how would you feel if I told you that I'd let you use the car? I don't know. What would I have to do? Well, that's a fair question, Kevin. Here's what I'm going to propose. What I'd like you to do, we've already identified that as a young adult, you've made some choices, you've made some decisions that have affected a lot of people. Now, what I'd like you to do is go away from here. It's 3 o'clock now. I want you to go away and I want you to think about a way that you can make it right with the people who... I want you to go away and think about how you can make it right with the people who were affected by your choices. And when you think about that, I want you to write a plan down and come back to me, and we'll take a look at it together. And if it sounds like a good plan, well, then you know what? I'll give you the car back, and you can be on a date with your girlfriend tonight. Well, what if it's not so good? Well, then you and I can work on it together, and we'll come up with something that is a good plan, that takes into account everybody who is affected by your choice. Okay? And if we work on it together and come up with a good solution, I again will give you back the car and you'll be able to go on your date tonight. Now let's step away from this for a second. There's a good likelihood Kevin's going to be kind of stubborn about this. There's a good likelihood he's going to say, I'm not doing that. You shouldn't have taken the car away for a month in the first place. And he may walk away. I can almost guarantee you he won't stay away for long. He may go away. I mean, Dr. Carlton took that car away from him for a month. That is a long time not to go out on a date or not to go bowling with your buddies. And when he goes away and comes back with an idea on how to make it right with those other people, now you have something tangible that you can work with. Not only can you work with it, but you can work together on it. And so maybe you tweak it a little, but the end result is that you have both worked together on a plan that's going to help make it right with other people, but more importantly, is going to enable your son to grow and your relationship with him to flourish. Now, you contrast that with the shoot 'em approach, where all he gets is a month-long suspension of his car privileges, and what has that taught him? More than likely what it's taught him is, hey, I got to build a better mousetrap. I got to make sure that next time I do this, I don't get caught, so there is no penalty. Or you can use the feed 'em approach, where now you've developed a better relationship, not only with him, but with the others that were affected by his choices. Before I leave you today, I just want to review some of the things that we touched on. People who are interested in building mindful relationships feed others before they feed themselves. And so really, those who feed others focus on regard for others. People who feed others have the power to move the spirit. People who feed others realize that profound things happen when we're mindful of other people. People who feed others also recognize that reactive responses are easy. It's easy to be reactive. It takes effort to be mindful. But people who feed others know that mindful solutions are effective solutions. Finally, people who feed others use human regard to plant the seeds of healthy relationships. And in the end, people who feed others reap the benefit of a better quality of life for all. I'm Dr. Connolly, and I'm here to ask what you will do with opportunities to build healthy relationships. Choice is clear. You can either shoot them or feed them. Thank you.